Babe, give me your lips for just a moment. My
We might just do a quick sound check. Do you want to talk in there? Because apparently my voice is a bit louder.
Mine's not as loud.
So Luke has to adjust it.
No, this is not as loud.
Okay,
1, 2, 3.
adjusting.
Amp up, amp up, amp up.
All
1,
right.
2, 3. That's about the most sensible thing I'll say all night.
Is this a song you guys chose? Or? We might make a start. I'm just going to pray, if that's okay. Father, I want to thank you for the beautiful gift of oneness that you give to a couple. It's extraordinary, it's sweet, it's satisfying, but it's also hard and challenging and hurtful. And when you bring two people together that are prone to sin, things happen. But then you do your work of grace and better things happen. So I just pray, Lord, that tonight we'd explore all those things, and at the end of it, you as the architect and creator of this oneness that we call marriage would just be seen as glorious and special. So help us, Lord. I pray that your Spirit will come upon us in a sense of anticipation that we're going to learn tonight. And thanks, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen. So we've seen a couple little snapshots there from the past, and it was actually kind of cool to put that together and just see the history. So it's 30 years. And bring back the mo. I'm glad you didn't say bring back the mullet. Did you ever have a mullet and a mo? How about you, Bub? No, I'm joking. So I've given the guys the questions, and they're pretty much the same questions as last time. But as always, they're just sort of fixtures along the way. We may end up asking other questions. I'm hoping to, I'm planning to finish a bit early so that we have a bit more time for you guys to ask questions. So when we do ask the questions, because we're recording, I'll just bring the microphone across to you, and if you could just hold it nice and close so that we get a good recording. I'm trying to have a top quality YouTube channel for the Willowburn Church. And anyway, so our first question, and I'm just going to flick through the slides as we go. When you met, was it love at first sight? Now, who would like to go? Oh, we've gone straight to Barb. That's good.
I always answer it. You answer it. I want to hear what
All
you
right. So wait a minute. Let's get a consensus. Who would like Barb to go first? Oh, it's even Steven. Who doesn't care? Okay, you're going first, Barb.
Oh. Yes, it was.
So tell us a little bit about it. What happened when? How did you meet Andrew, and what happened when you met him?
Well, he lived with a crazy journalist that I worked with at the newspaper in Tamworth. And Ned kept telling Andrew, oh, you've got to meet this girl I work with. And he kept telling me, oh, you've got to meet this guy that I share a house with. So the first time we met was at a pub.
Oh, wow. Lunchtime? Dinner time?
No, I was a green, fairly new Christian, and they were all trying to corrupt me.
Ah.
So I
it
agreed
was
to go to
late.
the pub on the Friday night and have my lemon squash.
Lemon
and there
squash.
was this guy I laid eyes on across the room. It's like, wow, who's that?
Is that what you thought?
Yes. He
Oh,
had
yeah,
a
so
mo,
you thought
blue
he-
eyes.
You
and
thought he was a bit of all right.
yeah, he had
Was
this
it the
jumper.
mo or
It was the jumper.
not the mo?
The mo and the jumper and the blue eyes.
Was it the same jumper that he's wearing now?
No, it
Oh.
was...
Still got it.
yes. But I shrank
doesn't-
it when we got married. It was absolute tragedy. And his grandmother unravelled the whole thing and reknit it.
So when you first saw him, how did it progress into a conversation? Did your friend sort of drag you over or something? Or
No, I think I just saw you that night. But
so you just saw
when I
him
next saw him, he was the Hunchback of Notre Dame at a dress-up party, and I was Maid Marian.
So Hunchback. So tell your side, Andrew.
The answer to the question was no.
Wasn't love at first sight.
No, I was a very...
You didn't like a jumper or something?
I was a very shy young man. Well, actually, I was probably about 24 or 25 by then. So I wasn't jumping out of my skin, but
Yeah.
she grew on me, I guess,
Yeah.
over a bit.
So how did it go from not sort of disinterest to she's a bit of all right too?
Well, our first date was actually a game of squash. and there's a long story which Barbara will give a short story
Did you wear
version of.
Did you wear a sweatband?
No, but I played
Okay.
squash for 45 minutes on my own, I can tell you. Over to Barbara for the other.
So was she late or? Okay. And was that a pattern for the future?
Intermittently, yes.
Cool. So just tell us a little bit about how you went from meeting, dating, or whatever. How long till you got married, that kind of thing.
From memory, it was about 18 months from the time we first played squash. Eventually, after 45 minutes waiting. But
I have to tell the story. I got locked in the bathroom.
Oh,
My flatmate, we were in a 2-story little flat, and my flatmate had gone away for the weekend, and I was having a shower, and I could not open the door. So I had to call for help out the window. Help, help! And a guy about 4 flats down came to my rescue and busted the door. And
Can you do
and I
that?
finally got there.
Can you do the help thing again? That was. No, you don't. So, so what? Did you believe her when she said that?
I had quite a sweat worked up by the time she got there anyway. I got pretty good at squash. But in the ensuing 18 months, I think you have to remember that I wasn't a Christian when we first met, and there was a pretty important thing that had to happen in that period of time before we were married. And that question was put to me about 6 or 9 months in, I guess, 6 months into our relationship, that you really need to sort yourself out with the Lord. So,
That was from Barb.
yes, she was a new Christian, but I guess she sensed that if we were to continue, her Christian walk would be very much compromised if I didn't share the same value or the same relationship with Jesus. So one of the important points I had to come to was what was more important, a relationship with Jesus or a relationship with Barbara. And the point that I did reach was the relationship with Jesus was the most important thing. And on the day that I came to a decision, if you like to put it that way, I had to hold that relationship with an open hand and say, no, whatever happens from here, Jesus has got to be first. And if the relationship continues, praise the God. But if it doesn't, well, I've got Jesus now anyway. So that was a very important part, and that's been a pretty centering part of our relationship ever since, of course.
So was it sort of Barb that really introduced you to Christianity, or was it sort of had it something been going on beforehand, or?
I'd had through my school ages, and prior to going to school, I'd had a Sunday school experience, I suppose. Sunday school meaning that I'd been taken to Sunday school. None of my family are or were Christians. So it was our neighbours that used to take me along to a Sunday school every Sunday when I was a young person. So I did have a working knowledge of Christian ways, and of course RE was still pretty important in those years. So I did have a certain knowledge, but not a relationship at all. So I did have a background, but not a strong background as in respect of being in a Christian home.
So what about you, Barb? Like with Andrew's maybe different spiritual posture for the first part of your relationship, did that sort of compute with you? Was it a big issue? Was it a small issue?
Oh, well, as we got to know each other, I thought, oh, hang on a minute. I'm a Christian and he's not. So we're different.
Yeah.
Andrew was very intellectual with his questions, and I couldn't answer them. As much as I tried, I couldn't answer his big questions. So as we tried to have those deeper conversations about my faith, and I tried to explain what I believed, I realised we can't continue this relationship unless you become a Christian. But I didn't want him to become a Christian just for my sake.
Yeah.
So I took him to visit. I was part of an Anglican church, so I took him to visit the minister, who was a good friend,
Yeah.
Laurie, and So yeah, that was Andrew was just born again instantly when Laurie dismissed the intellectual and cut straight to the heart.
Yeah.
So Andrew he was born again in that instant, really, and
Yeah.
realised that, that because he was Christian now, it might not mean that our relationship would continue, but that didn't really matter, I guess. So it just leapt ahead from there.
Cool. So things progress. Talk about your wedding. How many people were there?
85, I think,
85 in Tamworth.
Tamworth.
At a hall at a where?
St Paul's Anglican Church.
Okay. And Laurie,
Andrew walked to the church. I thought that was pretty cool. In his tails.
how far was that?
Oh, about 500 metres.
Did you pick weeds as you went?
No, I didn't. I walked with my brother. Yeah.
Nice.
We actually wanted to have an elephant, but
Elephant.
yeah, but there weren't many elephants around Tamworth at that
Are
time.
you setting us up for a joke, like a pun?
No.
Because we know you like your puns.
No,
Can you truncate this? No.
no,
Come on. You're thinking.
no.
Oh, I can see.
No, this is serious.
Okay, so 85. And was it Laurie that married you?
Yeah, Laurie Davies, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was on the 18th of May 1985.
Yeah. So the next question then, sort of relating to marriage, is, funnily enough, is what examples, let's do good first, we'll do good and bad. What good examples did you have of marriage in your life at that time? Because obviously that's going to feed into a concept of what marriage is going to be like. So.
Well, that's a very difficult question because in both our cases, and I speak for mine, my parents had been divorced about 8 years before. And so that wasn't exactly a great example of a marriage. I'd left home when that all happened. But thinking back, we were talking this over the other day, and my grandfather, my mother's parents, had a special relationship, although they had their ups and downs as well. And I guess if I look back, that would be the only model I could think of where there was a real heart of service one to another in that relationship. And I'm sure there were harsh words spoken at times, but we never witnessed those as grandchildren. So that was probably the only example that I can think of from that time that was a good example.
So you mentioned heart of service, so because that was going to be my next question, is what makes a good marriage? And if that was a good example, and you obviously, because you gave me that song as well, which I didn't actually get to put out, but the servant song. Yeah. So did you have that at your wedding or something?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that, Bub? Why you wanted that song?
Maybe you chose it.
Well, I don't know. For those who've been around Christian circles for a while, they might remember the servant song, Brother, let me be your servant. Let me be as Christ to you. Now, we won't sing it. We were going to sing it. Well, I was going to sing it, but that really was at the heart of, I guess, because we had chosen it, it was one of the centering thoughts of a marriage relationship, that idea of service, mutual service. The other songs we sang were Tell Out My Soul, and I can't remember the third one, but there was another one as well. But we sang that one as the final song, I think. Brother, let me be your servant, or sister, let me be your servant. I might sing it here one day, perhaps, if we can get Tim to play it.
Nice. What about on your side of the family in terms of good, indifferent sort of examples of marriage?
I couldn't think of good models, really.
So what? So when you look
Because
at
my parents
yeah,
totally busted up.
yeah, okay,
So we both came from broken homes.
yeah,
And I wanted to share that, like, I had no Christian heritage either. So I was passionate and starving to learn everything I could possibly get my hands on to start building from scratch. What does a godly marriage look like? So I read heaps. And my mentors were from books, really.
yeah. So I guess without being too personal, what were the key things in terms of the bust up and stuff? Because presumably you would be concerned about that yourselves.
I don't know. I'd left home when all this had happened, and apparently my dad turned up one day with a bunch of flowers and said I'd had enough. He'd had enough, and he moved out and lived with his auntie for a few years. So yeah, it was rather surprising to hear about it. I guess there was, I think one of the things that was an issue, and it's an issue for everybody, and that is good communication. And I think that was something that was lacking in that. But there was no shouting and fighting and all that sort of stuff. It was just somebody probably just felt it was wearing out. It was at a time socially of great change, because it was about 1974 when the Marriage Act was changed in Australia by the then Attorney General Lionel Murphy, and that had a huge effect on the incidence of divorce, because at that point it was then possible for people to leave their partner without having to have any just cause other than to say there was an irretrievable breakdown in the marriage. So I think there was a milieu around at the time of people just re-evaluating marriage in the secular sense, and so there was a flood, I guess, of divorces that happened in that late 70s period.
How about on your side, Barb? Was there any key things that really stuck out in your mind as to why the marriage ended?
It was a shock for me too. I think the saddest thing in both our parents' relationships was there was no violence or abuse or anything. They just decided, I don't want to be here anymore. For me, my father is a very manly man, and he was driving me to school one day. I was in year 10, and he pulled over and started crying. I'd never seen my father cry before. And he just lost it and said, your mother's leaving tomorrow. And my whole world just fell apart. I had no idea. So my mother left. I was the eldest, and I had 2 younger brothers.
How old were you then?
15. And I think the root of it is selfishness. My father's also very, he doesn't change easily, I guess. And so I can see there was a lot of frustration with that. But it's quite a difficult thing that I wouldn't share publicly about what my mother was up to at the time. But yeah.
So you've bucked the statistics then? Because
Yeah.
typically people from broken homes tend to divorce more frequently.
I think I felt an almost supernatural pull when I got to the age, and we got to the same stage in our marriage, that my family broke up. I could almost feel myself drifting in that direction almost subconsciously, and it's only by the grace of God that he keeps you. He's the glue. But I remember when we came to Toowoomba, that song, something beautiful, something good, all my confusion he understood. All I had to offer him was brokenness and strife, but he made something beautiful of my life.
Yeah, because music really speaks to you, doesn't it? You often share songs and stuff. So, next question. What were you really ignorant of when you got married? You can go first, Andrew.
Hormones.
Hormones. Your hormones?
No.
Oh, Barb's hormones. Oh, right.
I still
I
haven't
didn't
worked
think
them
you were
out.
that hormonal.
No.
He calls them hormones.
The other thing is I was fairly ignorant of was the sense in which marriage is something that you have to work on. You can't sort of just, it's not like going out onto the highway and just putting cruise control on and just keep on going and expect it to remain the same. It's something that requires constant input. And I was thinking about this the other day. It was a bit like gardening. I don't want to be too earthy about this, but I think of Barbara like a flower. It needs to be tended and cared for and watered and checked on.
Fertilised.
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. I'll just let that go.
You started it.
You know, I was trying to be agricultural, but not that agricultural. But the point is, I think marriage is something that you really do need to work on the whole time. And there's not such a thing as just getting it into gear and just cruising and just expecting it all to stay as it was at the start.
Do you agree with that? Like, you just need the energy just continually coming in to...
I think it's really important to remember that you're husband and wife first.
Mm.
Well, you're also individual people too.
Yeah.
He's Andrew, and I'm Barbara.
Mm.
And then we're a couple, and even when the children come along, it's really, really vital to make time to just stay connected.
Yeah.
I've been quite passionate and stroppy about that in the
Yeah.
last little while.
So how do you do that? How do you guys do that? Like, give us some examples of how you do
I
stuff
think
together.
instead of like going out to dinner and looking at each other and talking about issues, we just went to South Australia as an early 30th anniversary thing, and we went bike riding. And a couple of years ago, 18 months ago, we went on the 23K Lamington to O'Reilly's
Yeah.
bushwalk. So doing things together to stay connected so that we don't look at each other when the children leave home and go, so who are you?
Because you're more probably the adventurous one and have these ideas, and then you're maybe more conservative. So has that ever clashed in the past, and where, you know, you just want to stay home and Barb really wants to go? And
Yes. Quite a lot, actually. And it has been a little difficult because my entire working life I have travelled a lot, and so when you come home from work you want to often stay home, and that's when the rest of the family have been home all that time and they say, let's go somewhere, and you think, oh really, I'd just love to stay home this weekend or not go anywhere, or not. So that's really hard work. Anybody relate to that?
you're getting a few amens there.
So, and True, she's the visionary ideas person, and I'm the kind of just the Grinch, I suppose, sometimes. Say why it can't happen. But I've got to learn how to manage that in a way that doesn't squash Barbara, because I want to encourage her in that creative and adventurous spirit, but I don't want to kind of just be consumed by it either, to the point where we both fall in a heap. It's a really delicate balance sometimes to be able to do that.
How have you found that balance, Barb?
I really, really value Andrew's not just giving me permission, but his blessing more in the last few years to be able to do those things. And I think there's a safety net there, that I'm not going off on my own. It's with the children, and it's a real blessing that Kate's still at home, and so she's there, you know, in between shift work to have a meal for Andrew or heat up something. So I think God's been very gracious in that, and I really do appreciate Andrew's graciousness to let me have that freedom. And when he can come along for the ride. And so it's really important for me to live within those boundaries too, and be sensitive to that.
So that probably leads us to the next question, which is, what are the best things about your marriage? You've had a few weeks to think about this.
I have had a few weeks to think about it, and there are a few best things, I suppose. It's just sharing some of the special times, not as just as a couple, but with family, with children, and seeing them grow up. And I mean, just looking at those photographs that you've been looking at tonight and thinking, wow, there's a lot of shared experience there. There's also a shared faith in the Lord Jesus, which I think is so important, and that while it has waxed and waned, I guess, at various times over the 30 years, it's been again a very centering thing. And so to have that in common, I think, is such a wonderful thing. And I guess we've had to step out, or we've chosen to step out in some areas, and we've shared that same vision. For example, we shared the vision of home educating children, not just one or two, but all of them, and sharing that common goal, I suppose, has been a blessing as well. But having said that, you know, there are always those special times, but we don't live for those special times together. They're the icing on the cake, but certainly that shared experience and shared goals, I think, are very important. And having the space to be individuals as well as a couple too. I think there is a need to have to allow one another to have space to be who they are, who God made them to be.
Your turn, Barb.
Best thing about being married, I'm just so glad that there's just a comfortableness there. It gets better as you get older, I think, and you don't have to prove anything or explain everything. It's just really stable and comfortable, which is something, I guess, that's more contrasting to when I compare it to coming from a broken home. There's that stability and, yeah.
Next question. You got a lot of kids. What happened when they came along? So Rebecca was first.
I was almost 23. She was born in September and then I was 23 in October.
So was Andrew like you?
He's 6 years older than me.
That's right, yeah.
So he wanted to start a family before he was 30. She was born on the 2nd of September and he was 30 on the 6th.
And she's married now with in Canberra?
Rebecca's 26. He's better at maths than me.
So you got 26 to Daniel. What's Daniel?
10 on Saturday.
Yeah. So
Roughly about 2 years apart.
everyone in between. So 6 kids. So what happened?
8 kids.
8 kids, sorry.
Children.
6. I was going for a round number. Anyway. So yeah, so you got the 8 kids. What happens when they come along in terms of your relationship as husband and wife? Like, how did it change?
Completely.
Sleep.
Yeah, sleep deprivation, and most of you will be able to identify with that. And yeah, because we had 8 of them, it happened 8 times. I guess over time it got easier for me because I developed a hearing problem. And because I did work long hours, I guess, I had that kind of sense in which I really need to sleep so I can function the next day and be driving 400 or 500 k's or something like that. But it really did change. It was a very maturing time because suddenly those things that you took for granted as a child yourself and even as a young adult before children suddenly became things you couldn't take for granted any longer, and that's the responsibility for raising not just somebody in the physical sense, providing for their physical needs, but looking after their spiritual needs as well, and seeing them as spiritual people and have their need as a one that needs Jesus as well. So there are a lot of things that came about from that, but just the time pressures and suddenly having to put aside those things that we enjoyed as a childless couple, the going out and all that sort of thing, and just being prepared to knuckle down and just concentrate on taking care of children and hopefully taking care of one another along the way.
So it's pretty high calling being a mum, and so you've got it's the Mum's Heart conferences that you help with and stuff and coordinate.
Yeah, I'm speaking in Newcastle in a month. That's our anniversary weekend.
Yeah.
It's about not just homeschooling, it's about mothering with joy and confidence.
And I
I'll
know
be
you
sharing
spend a
about
little
that.
bit of time talking about, husband-wife relationships with homeschooling and that kind of thing. So, what are the key things you've learnt, once kids came along in terms of that marriage dynamic between husband and wife? Like, what are some of the things that you've learnt?
It's a team effort.
So what does that look like practically when you say team effort? Like,
Well, I think one of the best things Andrew could do for me when I had little ones was take some of them for a walk to the park.
Yeah.
We used to live in Curzon Street near the top of Arthur, so Webb Park was pretty much a block away. It didn't have to be for very long, but just so I could sleep or rest. If I had a new baby, then sometimes it's leave the older children, just take the baby. Whatever the need is, I just valued that support, I guess.
I'd have to say at this point I was a slow learner, so I didn't always respond in the way that was probably ideal, and so I made a lot of mistakes and failing to recognise the need. And it wasn't until sometimes when there was a meltdown, which was not uncommon, before I actually took some action. So I was a slow learner, and I don't want to take away from what Barbara did too, but yeah, I was pretty hard to get through to sometimes. I do remember, however, it came at great personal cost once. I took the two older girls for about a 4-hour walk, and one in a backpack and one in a stroller, and I actually damaged my kidneys, and I had to go. I didn't know that was the case, but I had this backpack with one of them bang, bang, bang against my kidneys for about 3 hours, and I went to the GP the next day, and he sort of took one look at me and wondered what I'd done, and then anyway, the penny dropped. So that was about the only time I've ever shed blood for the children, but I wouldn't take a backpack again. But yeah, I had some hard lessons to learn along the way, and sometimes it came about through a crisis in the circumstances that are at home, and I don't want to pretend I had it all together by any means.
Is that something that blokes are prone to, do you think?
Yeah, probably. There might be some households where Dad was a better example, but I guess in my case, my dad was could have been a fairly aloof person, and he could be sitting down at a kitchen table marking papers or something, and World War III would be happening around him, and it's just as if nothing was happening. So that wasn't a great role model, but I think there are some families where the dad is a lot more in tune with what's happening around and a bit more responsive, but that's something, it's a learned behaviour. It's certainly not something that's intuitive. I found it not to be anyway.
Actually, got these questions slightly back to front, so we'll just go back. So if you could go back 1 week before you're married, would you say anything? What advice would you give to your younger self?
I think I kind of answered this one already by saying that be prepared to work this marriage, and don't imagine it's just going to be like the honeymoon and just everything is just going to flick into gear and it'll just happen on its own. The other one, cheekily, I thought of afterwards was, do you really want to do this? But I'd already made up my mind quite a time before. But what about you?
I thought we were going to say, well, let's get married this week instead of waiting another week.
Oh, nice. So this is why I shouldn't give you the questions beforehand. Yeah. And you know how when you were talking about your kidneys, you sure you don't want to get a pun now? Because there's one there. It's right.
Well, mine's not a mush.
I was going to say you weren't kidding, were you? No.
Not at the time.
It's getting late. It's getting late.
I was just going to address that question with the hardest thing about marriage. I think probably one of the hardest times for us was when our son David announced that he was going to be a dad. That was a real shock for us as parents, as Christian parents and as homeschooling parents. Just pulled the rug right out from underneath me, and I particularly struggled for quite a few months with anger towards Andrew as a father. And I think that's a really key thing that I would say to wives is remember he's your husband first, not just the father of your children, and vice versa as well, I guess. I think that's a really important thing to remember. And the 3 C's in marriage, I think, are commitment, compromise, and communication.
How did all your sort of homeschooling friends react when you told them the news?
Don't you find that whenever you're going to be stepping out in a particular area to encourage others, that's when the devil is really going to attack you in that specific area? I was actually speaking about marriage not long after that. And I broke down and said how hard it was in our marriage dealing with that issue. And God really used that as the greatest platform to minister to others. Your greatest point of pain is your platform of ministry. So when you make yourself vulnerable in the hard places, God uses that the most.
How about you, Andrew? How did you process all that?
Probably a little differently. I wasn't so concerned about what other people would say. I remember being invited by David to go downtown and have a meal with him, and I thought, oh, that's really nice, Dave, because it was around about birthday time. I thought, oh, he was shouting me out for dinner. But my reaction was, I guess, a bit more measured. I don't know why, but I just said, you better go through with this, and I'm going to keep you accountable for what you've done. So, and he said, yes, I know you will. And so 4 or 5 years later, he's married and got 2 children. And but it was a struggle inwardly, but I didn't feel the pressure that perhaps some people would feel as to how to explain it to outsiders, because I just felt, I guess, secure in where we stood with the Lord, and knowing that people do make mistakes and we need to extend grace into that situation, but also a sense of accountability as well.
Thank you. Last question. I'm a bit out of order here, but how can church help or hinder marriages?
I was going to say not have too many programs that fragment families or put pressure on the husband going off and leaving the wife with the children in the bundle at home, especially in the evenings. Not to say nights like this can't be special, but too many programs, just too much pressure.
Yeah, I look at it from a different angle actually, and I think one of the things that we've really got to be, one thing that's really important to do is to actually communicate one with another and actually ask how your marriage is going. And I just have to acknowledge Adrian here, because I think he was probably the first person that ever asked the question, how's your marriage going? And I didn't know him that well, and I thought, that's a pretty forward question. But really, that's the sort of question we need to ask, because I think so much in the churches we don't talk about those things until there's a crisis. And then we start talking about it, and then it's all panic stations, more or less. And how do we try and deal with it now? But I think it's very important, if we've got a relationship with one another and there's an amount of trust there, that we do ask those questions. And I think the other thing is to really put a great value on it, not just as a cultural institution, but just as and this is one of my hobby horses, I guess, it is a picture of the relationship of Christ and the church, and how important it is from that point of view, and we can't really disregard that spiritual dimension to what it is to be married, in the same way as it's very important to understand what it is to be joined with Christ in that situation. So another thing I think we can also help is to certainly value marriage and get alongside people, support them in those tough times, and even anticipate those tough times as they start to emerge, and to minister to one to another. I guess we were once in a church in Toowoomba which had a ministry called Fresh Start, which was really good at trying to minister to people who had broken relationships. But in the end, I think that the emphasis that was put on there actually, I think it had a not always a helpful effect, in that it made it right to be divorced and remarried again, in such a way as that it kind of didn't pick up the step earlier and kind of help people through that hard time that led up to that. Inevitably, there will be times where people can't stay together, but I think the emphasis should be on helping them to do that, and as far as possible, and not.
Do you want to add anything? Or? So we get to the little data burst section. So this time we will try and keep it succinct, but if you need to keep going, I'll let you. I won't clamp down. But yeah, so we're sort of putting up a Bible verse, and in a paragraph or less, just make a comment on it. So you probably had a bit of a chance to think. By the way, it was Andrew's idea for the interviews, so as in 40, 30, 20, 10. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. It's a great idea. So Genesis 2:24, and they will become one. God said that.
It's just a mystery, isn't it? I think it's an amazing mystery that he often takes opposites and with Christ living in us, he brings us together.
Yeah, I look at the couples in the church, and most of them are kind of, you have like an adventurous one, a more conservative one. You know, they're stereotypes, but they're generally right as well, and yet they fit. Funny that, Andrew.
Yeah, well, for oneness to happen, there is a need to die to self, and that's a lifelong experience and takes a long time. But that's that's underlies that oneness.
So what does that look like tomorrow morning?
I might put the kettle on before I leave for work and bring in a cup of tea. Yeah. I don't know. It will be. It's different in different circumstances, of course. There's that. You know, I can put up plenty of hypotheticals, but it's probably not a practical example. But maybe if I've said something I'm going to do, and there's some pushback from there, I might be trying to think of a way of submitting myself to that situation. In other words, I might say I'm not going to be back from Gundawindi until 7 o'clock, and Barbara says, "Oh, I want you to be. I'm going out. Don't you remember? I'm going out at 6 o'clock," and I'll say, "I'll see if I can get back at 6." Kind of thing. So it might be just small things to accommodate, and to. But then on the other hand, she will say, "I mean, if I can't get back, you're not going to hold it over me," sort of thing. So maybe there's an example there.
Did you want to make a comment too, or on dying to self?
Sometimes I have to say, Lord, you've got to kill me. It's really hard to die. Just kill me.
Yeah, and it is an ongoing process, isn't it? It's Malachi 2:15. So guard yourself in your spirit, and do not break faith with the wife of your youth. I guess the principle also works in reverse. So, Andrew, do you want to go first?
Yeah, one of our favourite expressions is wife of my youth, or my expression anyway. But there is that solemn commitment we make on that wedding day in the presence of God, and also many witnesses, that says we promise to love and obey, amongst other things, to submit one to another, and that's something not to be taken lightly. And it is easy, I think, particularly as a young man, to let your mind drift at times when perhaps things aren't going so well at home. And you you really need to guard yourself against that happening, even if it's just in your thought life. It doesn't seem to be so much of a problem as you get older, but certainly as a young person, it does present some difficulties if your relationship is strained at home or distant.
And also just like to interject there and say, if anyone is struggling with that kind of thing, then come and get help. Like, ask someone. You don't have to tell the whole church, but go to one of the guys and just ask for help, because I know that it is an ongoing issue and it will poison your marriage. So that's the serious bit. What about you, Barb? What do you think when you think of that verse?
I think for us, I don't think we've ever actually talked about it, but I would just never, ever go there in my mind with the alternative of not staying committed to marriage. I just never entertain any thought that, well, if it doesn't work out, or I've had enough of this. I mean, I have thought, I can't do this anymore. And I remember one night storming off to Webb Park. We probably had a fight about money, I think, and swinging really hard on the biggest swing I could find for quite some time until I just calmed down. Also, I think one of the things that God's been very gracious to us in our journey, obviously we've made some pretty huge decisions in the way we've our lifestyle, and having 8 children and choosing to home educate and home church and lots of different choices against the flow of the norm. And I'm very grateful to the Lord that we've grown in those areas together, where we've learnt something that from the Lord that He's convicted us about. It's been together. We grow together, and I think as a weaker vessel, we need to guard ourselves as women, not to be not to go in a different direction with some new idea or newfangled something or other, but to grow together.
Has there been some common themes in terms of argument or disagreement, like some things that recur, or
Money?
so who's the frugal one, who's the spending one? Because normally, again, it's the opposites. It's not necessarily one bad or the other.
My grandfather was Scotch. So, no, I've always been one to be very careful, and you know, I remember going to uni and I had a weekly budget of $5 a week, and I used to count every
The
single
pies
cent.
were like 5 cents.
Yeah, it wasn't that. Oh.
Okay,
So no,
8 cents.
Yeah, I'm a lot more frugal in that way. Yeah, so I've had to learn to let the moths out of the cupboard sometimes, and well, even if it's somebody else letting the moths out. But
But I remember it's quite commendable because I think you told me you had pretty much enough money for a deposit on a house by the time you got married, which is pretty cool. My dad was the same, so
yeah, it was
nowadays
actually-
it's get the loan.
yeah, it was about a year before we were married, bought a house. Yeah, so it's a lot harder nowadays. 17 years.
Cool. You were going to say something, Bob?
I think there's an important principle as a wife, especially when you do choose to stay at home and not work outside the home. That verse that says, the heart of a husband trusts. Is it? Trust safely in... What is it? The heart of... The husband can trust safely in his wife anyway. That I am a steward of Andrew's hard work in the finances, and I'm very, very grateful for that I can have the choice to be able to stay at home. It's a privilege.
And God's really looked after you financially, hasn't he? You've been, with a lot of kids, could have been financial strain and decisions that you made, but he's really looked after you.
Yeah, certainly has, and we've really never been wanting. There are times that have been pretty tight, and there's always that time every year you don't know how much, because I'm self-employed, I'm not sure how much will come in, but there's always more than sufficient.
So
I think that can be a challenge too when you are comfortably off, that you're not careless with your money then too.
Yeah. So Andrew, this is for you. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church.
Yeah, I guess we've talked about that in the way of dying to self each day, and remembering that in those times where you do become quite selfish, and realising that Christ went to the cross, and not only that, he's provided a means by which we can live a life that is pleasing to him, and sometimes the only obstacle for that is actually yourself, that prevents you from actuating that which he's given. So there's that precious relationship of giving, of sacrifice, and sometimes we make too much light of that, I think.
And Barb, not a favourite one in the 21st century. Wives, submit to your husbands. It's in the same passage.
I actually really am so grateful for that. He's the responsible one. The buck stops with him. I remember, because he used to go away quite a lot when he worked for Monsanto, and so I had to learn to manage when he was away for sometimes a week at a time. And as soon as he walked in the door, I would feel utterly exhausted all of a sudden. It's like, oh, phew, you can carry that burden on your shoulders. I'm so grateful. Mm.
Did you want to make any comments on it? Or are you like a dictator? Because, I mean, most people looking in on this or even listening to it, we go, oh, that kind of, we all know what that's about, subjugation.
I've never quoted this verse to Barbara, and I would never. I don't think I'd be around for very long if I did. But it's something I've never sort of said, here, have a look at this. And I think that's the real challenge in the Christian walk. And that's the challenge that Jesus had too. He could have easily, there's a lot of times he could have just wiped away opposition just with and we could really misuse the scriptures by saying, look at this one. How about it? So yeah, very cautious about doing that. But I'm glad that you've got that attitude towards it.
So how, like, practically, what does that look like for you? I mean, because you talked about a lot of hard decisions, but then again, you're the ideas person. So how does that play out?
You mean with choosing to homeschool and stuff?
Yeah, and but also the adventurous side, and and then you've got wives submit to your husband. Like, how does that?
Well, I'm grateful that he protects me from myself sometimes by
Yeah.
saying no.
Yeah,
He's the practical one. And sometimes that's really frustrating, but if we're both in the right frame of mind and submitting to one another in the right attitude in Christ, then he's usually right and wise. Yeah, and I think in the last couple of years, though, I'm really encouraged that God is the one who's changing him to be a bit more adventurous. It's fun.
What about, before you talked about the argument that you had, and Andrew, you actually confessed as well and said that, you could have been a better listener and you're a slow learner and so forth. So you're, as a wife, seeing Andrew, and there's some, let's just say, immaturity, not necessarily sinfulness or whatever. Are you submitting to that? I mean, how does that play out then? Because you know that something probably needs to change, and yeah, how does that play out with this verse?
I've struggled with having to get really stroppy sometimes. I really struggle with that, meek and quiet. Wanting to be meek and quiet, yet when I got really stroppy, sometimes that's when things happen. I don't
Yeah.
really know what to do about that.
Yeah,
I hate how that's made me,
yeah,
but sometimes there's been some breakthroughs.
yeah.
But
that
not
probably
really
also shows
ideal.
shows a depth of feeling though as well. That's it's
I
a
guess
cry for
yeah.
help.
It's like, listen to what my heart is trying to
Yeah.
communicate to you here. And I think, when Andrew took Timothy to the UK recently, that was an absolute heart cry that I've made for a few years of please connect with our sons
Yeah.
and make a difference. And I've prayed about it for a long time, and that was just like, yes, he gets it. That was a wonderful breakthrough,
Yeah.
and I think that was a real turning point for Andrew.
Well, I
as
saw on
well.
Facebook, Tim posted about, I think it was a year since you guys were over there or something. Put a little photo up there.
So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it just brings us to another point, and that is that we shouldn't really try and change the other person, but let God change the other person. Oftentimes we can just ask God to change ourselves, our heart attitude, and that should be the first stop. And if God changes the other person, praise the Lord as well. So I didn't want to change Barbara. I mean, as much as sometimes I wish she didn't get so stroppy, but then my prayer to God is that how can I respond to that in a way that will bring a greater wholeness to the whole relationship, rather than saying just stop the other person doing that, change me too. And if that's the combined effect, along the way the other person has changed. That's God's best.
I think we've seen quite a few really bizarre breakdowns in families that we've had close fellowship with, and that's like these warning bells are going for me, and I'm shaking us together saying, we're not going to let that happen to us.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about it? And pushing through
Yeah,
the hard brick walls to come out the other side stronger,
yeah,
together, connected, closer. Really connect with one another so
Yeah.
that we don't just even drift apart by default.
Yeah.
It's real,
Yeah.
I've become quite
Got a real
passionate about
sense of
that.
urgency about
Yes,
it.
yeah. I feel just so sad when I see Christian friends totally disintegrate. Their lives are just disintegrated.
Last one, and then we'll have some questions from the floor. And there's no real kids here, so we can speak candidly if you want, but marriage should be honoured by all and the marriage bed kept pure.
I thought of a short answer to this. Men, eyes above the shoulder or to the left, or on the ground or up in the sky. Especially when you're younger. I mean, but it's not a temptation that's gone when you get to 50 or 60, I'm sure. So I think there is a sense in which we've got to be careful with our eyes, and I'm not talking about just in the real setting, but if you watch television or see a movie or something like that, or you're in a place where the temptation, you need to be careful about what you allow your thoughts and your eyes behold, I guess. So that's really, really important.
How about you, Barb? What does that mean to you? And shall be honoured by all and the marriage bed kept pure?
I think have a respect for each other as people, not just a body.
Yeah.
You're a person.
We'll go into question time now. So the way we'll do this is I'll just rove around, and again, we'll go for as long as we want, but we are getting a little bit late. So just have a little bit of a think about some questions you'd like to ask the guys. Or guy and girl. Sorry, I use the guys in a gender neutral sense, but it's not politically correct, so I shouldn't do that. So, I won't go through all the questions, but yeah, who would like to ask Barb and Andrew some questions? You can ask anything. They've given permission, within reason. No. Who wants to go first? We can't have too long a pause on our YouTube channel, so come on, good on you, Raji. Excellent. Icebreaker.
Thank you for everything you shared. My question relates to, you talked about keeping each other as husband and wife, not just mum and dad, and seeing each other like that. And you guys have a lot of kids, and each of them would have required something from you. I know, because that's how it was for my brothers and sisters with mum and dad. And dad, frankly, didn't have enough time for all of us. So how did you guys manage to spend time with each of your kids and have a relationship with them and still see each other as someone you wanted to spend time with? How did you have any energy left for each other? What did you actually practically do?
It was very difficult for a period of probably about 15 years when we had a lot of young children. It's been easier in the last 5 to 6 years. One of the things that we did do, and we don't do it any longer, was that we had a weekly routine of Sunday nights sitting on the couch and praying. It sounds very pious, but it was one of the few times that actually we could sit quietly together. That's when children actually did go to bed at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock. They don't do that anymore, of course. But the other opportunities we had were very few and far between to be together without children, and that was probably when we were visiting relatives or something like that, and grandparents took care of the children while we went off for a night or two, or even an afternoon or something like that. It's something that I think we could have done a better job of recognising how difficult it was to maintain that husband-wife relationship. And so that's why I think the church can be so helpful in that regard, and it's great that the Glow Girls have done what they have done and just given couples a night out together, or just a time together, even as a group of couples for that matter. And that's something we can really do to support our young people who are in the heat of the moment of having young children and just not being able to get away and have time alone without it being just a business meeting, which is what happened a lot of the time. You just talk about all the issues. That's not. You've got to have those things out, but that's not nearly as enjoyable, I guess.
Sometimes going for a drive can be a good talking time. And I think the first time we ever went away for a night on our own was only 24 hours, but when we were pregnant with our third. Oh, well, I was. Yeah, that's true. But I think it's not really a good idea to leave your children for a night when they're younger than that, really. Depends if you've got to mind them, I guess. I think many young couples have different expectations these days. But you can have, when your children are little, you can tuck them in at a reasonable hour and you've got time to connect then. We like playing Scrabble. We always won.
Well, you've rejuvenated your interest in sailing as well recently, haven't you? Or Barb's rejuvenated yours?
Yeah, I've provided the boat. but thankfully the children really enjoy it, so that's really good. Yeah, that is something that we've kind of reconnected a bit with, but time will tell as to whether I really embrace that fully as I did 30 years ago.
Any other questions from the floor? How old were you when you got married, Andrew? You were 29? So you'd been single for quite some time? Cause we've got a few
No, I was 26,
Oh, okay.
26 going on 27, yeah.
Yeah.
Barbara was 20.
Yeah, I was just going to say, have you got any... Because I think Peter was talking about the bliss of singleness or something in a book that he handed to his wife. But so you were a little bit younger though. But do you remember the single days? Like, was there a great yearning to get married and you were feeling lonely?
Yeah, there probably was. I didn't ever have any prospects. So, as in this, I was pretty hard to get through to. So there wasn't any really to speak of before Barbara came along, which is a blessing in many ways. But yeah, I was probably getting to the stage of wondering, when's this going to happen? So Ian and others, Bruce, who's not here anymore, don't lose heart, because God and His graciousness will bring the wife of your youth to you. Sometimes it just means holding those things with an open hand, which is what I was doing, I guess. But I didn't enjoy, to the same extent, the life as a bachelor as Peter did, I don't think.
Yeah, go.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think of how to even word it. It's kind of, I guess it'll be a long question in the sense that before you guys were married, when you were dating, Barb, you do have a very adventurous spirit and like to go out. Did you share like the love of adventure and travel and that when you were dating? And if you did, like Barbie say, now you are loving that he's blessing you to go out on these adventures with your kids. But before you were able to go out with your kids, how did you deal with that yearning and that longing and that desire to be adventurous? And Andrew, did it rub you or bother you? Like this is a question because obviously Barbie, you and I are pretty much exactly the same, and Tim is very much like you. And I'm just wondering, because we're kind of at that point where I've got the desire to travel and to explore, but the kids are young and Tim doesn't share that desire. So if that was similar to you, how did you deal with that? As far as like, Barb, how did you deal with being stuck? Not stuck at home, because that's an adventure in itself. And Andrew, how did you deal or help her with that longing?
I think the Lord kept those, the travel thing, I really wanted to travel before I settled down. So it was like, bother, I've met Mr. Right too soon. But I wasn't about to let him go, so it was worth it. So the Lord, in His graciousness, made the desires for travel dormant. It just wasn't an issue for me for 20 odd years. It was impossible, so I didn't think about it. It's different for you because you're from the US, so there's a different factor there. But I'm grateful that those dreams were dormant for travel. Yep. We did travel a little bit when we were first married because he worked for an American company, Monsanto, so we went to the States together. And we did a lot of bushwalking. That was the main thing that we loved to do. BC. The logistics got harder. We went camping until we had 5 children.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess without even thinking about it, one of the ways that we did cope with that was we actually did do some semi-adventurous things with the children, like camping holidays. I remember getting flooded out at Bagara in 1996. We getting up in the middle of the night, taking a tent down and all that sort of stuff. So there were some, if you look back on it, you see those things that were happening, but it wasn't kind of like, what's our schedule for this year? What are we going to have to do? There was no benchmarks or so. I know some families do that. They say, we're going to do this year and that, and you kind of think, I don't think I could keep that pace up. But just making the most of whatever opportunities there are. And I think if I had my time over again, and I wouldn't, but if I had my time over again, I'd be a lot more perceptive about those things and try and make more of an accommodation and maybe die to self a bit more and just say, I'm yeah, I'm too tired to do all that sort of stuff, because there's never a right time to do it later on, because you do get too tired. Does that answer? Yeah.
Anyone else? You're all looking a little bit sleepy. All right, I'm sure you can talk to these guys later, or... Oh, there is someone? Oh, Raji again. Need a rover.
It'll be a simple one this time. You guys homeschooled. So did my parents. Was that positive or negative effect on your marriage?
I'd say overall positive, although I've still got this frustration, I suppose, that Barbara doesn't like maths, and none of the children don't enjoy maths. So, but I think it has been a positive thing, because one of the things that underlies that is just that sense of responsibility. And I'm not saying that you can't delegate that to somebody else, but it does give us a bit of a focus, and that was to ensure that children were raised in a godly home, and that our goal, if there was such a thing, was to raise godly seed. In other words, the next generation of Christians. And not all of them are walking with the Lord. Well, one isn't in particular, but I think that's something we've shared together as just one of those life activities where we share some of the... I'm accountable for it, but we share some responsibilities there. Barbara's done most of the interface with the teaching thing. I always do the maths, of course, but yeah, I don't know what you think about that.
I think it's just a whole positive thing. It's our life, and it means you can go on holidays when it's less crowded, less expensive. There's lots of pros. It's great. Yeah, field trips.
I'm interested to know whether, do you think homeschooling suits all kids? You know, because you actually tried a little bit of both, didn't you, with one of the boys, I believe, and
2 of the boys went to school for a year.
Yeah. So yeah, like, do you think it suits everyone, or is it?
Well, yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, I don't think it's for everybody, because their circumstances are such that maybe 2 parents have to work at least part time in the situation, and some, unless that vision is shared by both spouses, both husband and wife, it's not going to go anywhere. And you need to be sure it's not just a preference, that it is a conviction that you have. And so if you haven't got a conviction about it, it's going to, as soon as the first obstacles come along the way, you're going to it's going to fall. The other thing is that, yeah, I think you need to hold that in an open hand and say it may be just for the young children, or maybe for some families they actually start later. So when their children reach high school age, they tend to do that in response to the needs of the children very often, rather than an overarching goal of that we started with. So, yeah, there are children that probably really will thrive no matter what circumstance you place them in, whether it's in the home or in the school, and there's others that are going to struggle no matter where you have them.
We might finish up there, because we are getting a little bit late, but what we might do is, in a tick, we'll get you guys to pray, gender neutral guys, pray for us as a church, and just a little advertisement. So in a month we'll be up to the 20-year couple. The month after that, or in fact it'll be a little bit less than a month, it'll be the church camp. So if you're wondering who the 10-year couple will be, it's going to be Nick and Melissa, who I think some of you have met. So they've got some stories to tell as well. And I think that's about it for tonight. So would you... sorry, yep. Oh, you do? Yeah, sorry. Come. Oh, yeah, I'll come to you.
Sorry. I've just been trying to figure out how to word it, and it's not going to be well, so sorry. How have you, in the 30 years that you've been married, kept God at the centre of your marriage? How has that looked, whether it's as far as prayer or reading the Bible together or church together, or like how has keeping God at the head of the household looked? Does that make sense? Yeah.
In a variety of ways, and it's not been the same the whole time. So I think one thing that is so important for the husband is to make space for the wife to have personal devotional time, even if it means taking the children out. I mean, you can do that without having to worry about it now, but there was a time, if I'd been more perceptive, I might have given you that space to have a relationship with the Lord. I think for some people, they really thrive with, as we did for a while when we prayed together on a Sunday night just before the week started and sort of committed all those things together. We didn't do that for the whole time. But I think there's two aspects. One is making space for each one and to encourage each one to have that relationship with Jesus, that they, having that quiet time, whether it's in the morning or the evening or whatever, have that time, make sure that the other person's provided for in that way. And then the second thing is, and this is something that needs to be negotiated, I guess, is to have that time together where you do pray, not just in a crisis, but in a maybe more systematic way. And we haven't been consistent in that, but there was a time when we were consistent in that. I don't know what other things you can say.
Sometimes I've just asked Andrew to pray for me. Sometimes that takes you by surprise, I think. Yeah. It's like, oh, we should do that more often. And I think, well, why do I not ask?
I think that's a very good thing. Yeah, just like we came back to before, the way in which the church can really help marriages is to ask the question, pop the question, can I pray for you, or will you pray for me? So that's probably one of the things, just to be open to that, and rather than say, oh no, that's something we do privately on our own.
Thank you for your openness and some rawness there as well with some of the things that have happened in your married life. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sure if you want to talk to these guys 2-on-2 or 1-on-1, I'm sure they'd love to have you out there at Tello Wood. So yeah, have a chat with them. And yeah, if you could close us out with, maybe you pray first, Barb, and then Andrew, just pray for our little church.
Lord, I'm so grateful for the work that you are doing in each one of our lives. Lord, I'm thankful for Debbie and Nick, the way that you have brought this couple into our midst and the work that you're doing in their lives, bringing restoration and seeing a situation that's been difficult and perhaps challenges each one of us too, Lord. Thank you for the honesty there. Thank you for a man like Nick who's humbled himself to seek help. Lord, I just pray that would happen more before crisis times, that you would keep men humble to ask for help, to be real with one another. Lord, to share where the rubber hits the road stuff with one another. I thank you that I do see that in this church, the realness and the authenticity of living out faith in this messy world, Lord, and being honest and real and vulnerable with each other. Lord, I pray that as women we can really be exhorting one another to cherish our husbands, to keep an eye out for one another, and to really share a love and a care for one another. Please protect the marriages that are in this family of believers, Lord. Guard and protect them in Jesus' name.
Lord, we thank you for the example of Jesus, who has gone before us and laid his life down for his church. And so we see that beautiful picture of the relationship of Christ and the church being expressed in the marriage relationship. I pray that there would be an authenticity in that as we look to Jesus and see that our marriages are really an outworking of that relationship that God had from eternity to bring a oneness and bring a restoration to that which was made that was perfect in its original form, and that at a time in the future will be once again made perfect. But in the between time, Father, we see ourselves in having to work that relationship out, not only with the Lord Jesus but with one another. And Father, we thank you that in the institution of marriage we find that safe space in which we can grow in you. And we just thank you for the marriages that are represented here and those that will occur in due course as the right persons are brought together. I pray a blessing on each one and that they would be strengthened by the power of your indwelling Spirit to live out a life that is pleasing to you. And we just do thank you, Father, that you do provide that means by which we can live in that grace that you've shown to us in Jesus Christ. Amen.
All right, thank you everyone for coming, and if we could just get a hand to pack up, etc., that'd be really good. Otherwise, we'll see you Sunday.